before we get going, I would like to acknowledge two of our sponsors this evening, Horace Height of the Horace Height Estates, a residential community located in Sherman Oaks, the place you come home to, and Gaspar Insurance for all of your insurance needs with offices right here in Woodland Hills Warner Center. If we can have a bit of applause for those two folks. They're making it possible for us to videotape and bring this to the rest of the community. The next question will come from Kobe King, and that will be to Justin Clark.
Great, thank you. Let me follow up with a related question to what Steve said. A number of you mentioned what the focus of my question is going to be, but I want to dig a little deeper, and that is about housing. Many do consider that the shortage of and the high price, which are pretty closely related, of housing to be one of the biggest problems in the entire state of California, and certainly a huge issue in Los Angeles County, especially for young people and the working class. I know this is a very complex issue, and you don't have a lot of time to answer, but please, what are your ideas for increasing the stock of housing and increasing affordability?
Oh, and that goes to Jeff Bornstein.
Oh, me? Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, who did I?
Justin, actually.
I'm sorry,
I think
Justin. I'm
Justin's
very
up
sorry.
first.
Justin Clark, please.
I think that the solution is not going to come from any one candidate's ideas. It's going to come from, as Anchor said, being open and inclusive to a wide variety of people in all sorts of fields, including people who have studied this problem, people who have lived through this problem. FDR, during the Great Depression, surrounded himself with people of opposing ideas so that he could find a working solution. The solution is not going to be drastic changes in zoning laws that take away local control. It's not going to be just building housing farms, but rather going to be the need for a constructive dialogue that is people knowing their own limitations so that they can work together towards an actual solution.
Okay. Next, Jeff Bornstein.
Tax breaks. Tax breaks for low-income housing. Simple enough. Tax breaks. You know, the city of Los Angeles gave Westfield $50 million tax break, a $50 million tax break for the already built village. We should be putting that money into tax breaks for low-income housing. Westfield wants to build a 14-story building on this site here at the Promenade. It should be mostly low-income housing, and you know what it's going to be? It's going to be $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, and $6,000 apartments, which very few people can afford. It isn't going to help our housing problem. It isn't going to help our homeless problem. We need tax breaks for low-income housing.
Daniel Brin.
As I said before, we need to approach it from different directions. We need to subsidize housing. For the poorest among us, for the families, we can't shy away from that. But we can't get away from denser development projects in appropriate places in the city. I'm against urban sprawl. I think that's destructive. But we need to find locations and encourage and make it easier to build high density housing, and of all kinds, for all income levels.
Thank you. Jesse Gabriel.
Yeah, Kobe, I think your question is an important one, and one of the things to note here is our housing crisis isn't just about homelessness, it actually hurts our economy. There was a McKinsey study that came out the other day that said we lose $140 billion a year in GDP because of our housing affordability crisis here in the state of California. So a couple of things that we can do. First is the way that most low-income housing is built is it's financed by a federal tax credit called the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit that's administered by the state of California. Now, the Trump administration's tax reform plan has actually changed the economics of that credit, and there's going to be a lot less of it available. So we need to think about how the state can step in with state tax credits to make sure that we're not losing more affordable housing. And the other thing that we need to do is think about responsible infill development, because the price of housing and the supply of housing are directly related. So with appropriate local control, how do we get more infill housing so we have more housing supply so we can bring down the cost of housing?
And Tricia Robbins Casson.
Most of the issue has to do with the fact that we haven't been producing enough housing for 10 years. We've been about 100,000 units short every year for the last 10 years, and that's led us to where we're at today. So the overall solution is the production of more housing at all levels. Affordable housing sometimes, or oftentimes, costs more to build than market rate, believe it or not. And so that's why what we really need to focus on is the missing middle housing, housing for our middle income folks. And so there's many different ways that one can go about this. Certainly putting density where it belongs, on commercial corridors, near transit stations, that's one of the ways to address it. The other way is to ensure that we are providing solutions both for rental and for sale housing. For example, there was a public housing development near Boyle Heights where when they redeveloped it, they not only produced rental housing, but they also produced for sale housing in such a way where the city retained ownership of the land. The house was sold to the family. The family, when they resold it, only achieved the value of the incremental difference between what they bought it for and what they sold it for. And it was maintained at a lower level and targeted to particular incomes.
Thank you.
So that's one of the ways to get at that middle income housing.
Thank you very much. Ankur Patel.
Right, so housing at all levels, not just the tax breaks for affordable housing, the density that we talked about, the infill, but then also we're going to have a massive tax reform at the state of California because of what happened at the federal level and how we approach this. So there's so many different ways to incentivize housing at all levels. And there's also other creative ways that we look at what does that mean, all levels. We've talked about motels becoming renovated, retrofitted for low-income housing or a temporary solution for people who are on the streets. So there's all these different creative ways that we're going to be looking at. There's going to be a menu of options, and as we look at the way that we distribute these tax breaks at the state level, it's important to be inclusive and look at all these different solutions.
Thank you. Ray Bishop.
This is a serious problem, and it's going to take a creative solution to resolve it. And as a veteran, many years ago, I realized this was a critical problem for veterans, and I pitched it to the Veterans Administration Westwood. I designed a site that would be used as a tent city type of thing with 4 major tents, just like we had in the service when I lived in a tent for a year in Vietnam and lived in Alaska for a month, moving in a tent, and Desert Strike and Needles in a tent. And I knew that this was a possible way to deal with it. Brad Sherman and Henry Waxman helped me get the attention of the director of the VA. I went and I pitched it to them, and they said, this is beneath the dignity of veterans. And I said, what? It's beneath the dignity of the veterans or anybody to live on the streets, and we need to solve this problem. As a former person that helped to start Penny Lane, and I was a president and chairman of a general hospital in the Valley, I know that these people need treatment, and the best way to do it is to create residential treatment facilities that provide supporting services and a place to live while they're getting treatment.
Thank you very much.